Carleen, I genuinely thought when we got to this show tonight that the diplomat in question would already have been expelled. I'm actually a bit surprised. 5 days in, even following the minister's comments yesterday, I interviewed Mr. LeBlanc last night. He seemed to say something's going to happen soon. Like, I am a bit surprised that nothing's going right now.
It is a bit hard to understand what might be going on behind the scenes right now in terms of the steps that are required before a diplomat from another country is formally expelled, and why that hasn't come to pass yet. You have to wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that the Prime Minister has departed for the UK for the coronation and different things like that. But at the end of the day, I think what probably most Canadians just want to see is that it happens. I don't think that there's much disagreement about that. Hearing Michael Chong speak about it really puts a different tone on the whole thing. I mean, this is a human being. This is a person with a family who has chosen public service as a career, and as a result has now been exposed to these levels of threats. I think there's a lot of questions still left to be answered around, obviously, not only who did know what when, but who should know what when. The Prime Minister has taken quite an unprecedented step by indicating that he has now directed CSIS to brief him and the Minister of Public Safety on additional pieces of information that normally perhaps CSIS would have elected not to share. I mean, that level of direction is not something you see very often between elected political officials and security and intelligence advisors either.
There seems to be a gap, Isan, between like what the security apparatus thinks meets the bar to convey that information and what regular people who hear this stuff and hear targeting of a sitting MP by a diplomat, like the reactions seem to be very different, and that seems to be in part acknowledged, towards the end of this week by the Prime Minister.
Yeah, but I think that there's a disconnect also between CSIS and public information. Like, we are finding things out a lot later than is ideal, and it's just like really confusing still where these lacks of information passing are happening, how that process is happening or not happening, as the case may be. And this has been going on for a lot of different stories based on intelligence that has been collected and maybe or not shared with different levels of government. So I think that there is a big disconnect between, I think, what the public is able to understand about this story, between what the PMO and the Liberals are kind of telling us and letting us know what happened and when, and then also just between these, obviously the MPs and the victims of what could potentially be, really scary and, privacy invading actions. How all of those are really kind of being connected right now is quite interesting, I think.
Well, even the fact, Jason, that Michael Chong said to me today that the intelligence that specifically names him as a target also says other MPs were targeted. It doesn't name them specifically, but does say more broadly. Today, the Prime Minister was asked in French the same thing: are other MPs targeted? And his answer did not address the substance of that question, even remotely. The fact that he has yet to kick out this diplomat, and that they have made public that the reason they are not doing it yet is that they're assessing how China basically will react. How do you interpret that?
It's weak. The Prime Minister's response to this whole thing has been weak, and I think watching Mr. Chong, and I think, Carleen was mentioning, watching him talk about the threats to his family, or the implied threats to his family, just horrifying to watch. The Prime Minister's mismanaged this from day one, right? He told us, remember, this was all about election interference. He told us it was no big deal. He told us it didn't have any impact on the election campaign. Don't worry, it's all handled. Now we're in these sort of horrifying revelations. And by the way, you sort of say, are you surprised the Prime Minister didn't say anything in French today? Well, I'm not surprised of anything this guy does anymore. If it wasn't for Bob Fife and Steve Chase of the Globe and Mail, we wouldn't know any of this thing. We've had 6 or 8 months of this now, of revelation after revelation. And also, by the way, if there weren't people in the national security apparatus who thought his government's response to some of this was unacceptable, which is CSIS and others, it's obvious that where a lot of this information is coming from. It's people, the calls coming from inside the House. CSIS, or people around CSIS or your national security infrastructure, are not happy with how you're dealing with China, Prime Minister, and they're letting everyone know that it's not really been acceptable. So the fact that the diplomat hasn't been, and I couldn't believe Madame Joly. I understand they're cross-pressured. I understand it's very difficult. I understand, you don't get to pick the crises that you're thrown into, right? I understand why she said, we're going to look at, we're going to look and China might react to this. Well, yeah, China will react to this. Agreed. I think most Canadians understand that. But to say those words out loud, we're a sovereign nation. There's a diplomat, sort of talking loosely about threatening one of our MPs and his family. We're more than one MP. It's unacceptable. It's weak. And he's mismanaged this from the start, and he better get a handle on it, because this isn't just about politics. This is about the country. Are we a real country or not?
There's a bit of a delineation, I think, Rachel, between a lot of the allegations that have come forward so far, in that some of them are being refuted. There's a lot of opaqueness around them. This is different in that it's all confirmed. No one is denying anything. CSIS confirmed it to Michael Chong. The Prime Minister said that. Michael Chong said that. And yet, I think that's why the political pressure on the federal government is maybe even at a heightened place compared to already what has been a lot of pressure and they're facing. Like, the scrutiny they're facing over what they do in response to this feels different even than previously.
Absolutely. And I think for Canadians who have been kind of trying to figure out what's going on with this whole foreign interference conversation, Trudeau Foundation and this and that, this is a very concrete, easily understandable topic. A member of Parliament's family has been targeted and threatened. That is something everyone can understand and kind of take away from this and get concretely what is going on here. So I think that is where the pressure is coming from, because this is something that is very easily understood. It's like the orange juice example of this whole foreign interference thing. And I think that is where the Prime Minister needs to step up and make clear exactly what the rationale is for why they haven't gotten rid of this diplomat yet. He's, citing kind of these ephemeral things like the economy and security. Like, Canadians, I think, can handle a bit more serious of a response and a clear explanation of what the implications would be for Canada if you were to take this step. The other part of this I think is interesting is Jason was talking about there potentially where the leaks are coming from. Clearly there seems to be, if the Prime Minister was correct today, a disconnect between this getting moved up from CSIS to the National Security Advisor or something. I can understand why there might be frustration from CSIS saying, the Prime Minister is not acting, he's not doing enough, not taking these foreign interference threats seriously. But if they're not reaching him, what can he do?
Well, why aren't? And the follow-up is why aren't they reaching him? Yeah, that's a question without an answer right now.